delighted right now to welcome the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, who's on the line. Good morning to you.
Great to join you, Julia.
Lovely
How are
to
you?
speak. Very well indeed. Lovely to talk to you. Let's talk about what you're announcing today, this £500 million funding for a new quick result COVID test. These are trials that are going to go across launched in Salford, existing pilots expanded in Southampton and Hampshire. Is this the game changer test that we keep being told we're finally going to get?
Well, this is a new testing technology that will allow us to expand testing much more. Over the past 6 months, we've done an enormous amount to expand testing capacity to what we've got, based on the current technology, where you have to have the swab down the back of your throat, send it off to the lab, and you get the result normally within 24 hours. The new technologies, they can bring the lab to you. The turnaround can be an hour and a half, or in one case 20 minutes. It just expands the amount of where you can do tests. It makes it much easier to get access to them, and so it's not just about finding the virus, which is really important, but it's also about being able to do a test to check you're negative, because then you can have more confidence in going about your normal business. So it's about enabling people to get on with their normal lives, as well as, of course, the vital job of suppressing the virus.
Okay, so if this test works, if we're sure it can work and we can roll it out and it's quick and it's cheap and we can have mass testing in the community, how quickly before we can have this routinely, at schools, in the workplace, just community testing, and indeed at airports, crucially. We'll come on to that in just a few moments.
Well, let's do that. I'm not putting a deadline on it. Weeks and months is what I'm saying. The reason is we've got all these different technologies, 100 of them that we're working with. We're reliant on the scientists, on the technology working, and then getting them into mass manufacture. We've trialed a whole series of them. We're expanding those today. So essentially, it starts today and rolls out across the country over the weeks and months to come.
Okay, the question is how many months? We keep being told we should be worried about a second wave this winter. It's not much use to us if it happens next spring, is it?
Well, look, you and me both, Julia. You and me both. What I can assure you is I am pushing this as fast as is humanly possible. What I can't do is put a date on it, because we've got to get these things working. We've got to get them. 3 of them, as I say, are working, but we're working with 100 others. And we've got to get them into mass manufacture, and we've got to make the whole system work. Okay. But I am confident enough to put £500 million into it, and to start talking about how this can help free up all the things that we love.
Let me put to you a tweet that Sir Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, tweeted yesterday. Boris Johnson and his government has lurched from crisis to crisis and U-turn to U-turn. To correct one error, even 2 might make sense. But when they've notched up 12 U-turns and rising, the only conclusion is serial incompetence. What do you say to that? Is this government serially incompetent?
Well, I think what people want to see is everybody working together to solve this national problem. Not political sniping from the sidelines. So I don't think that will do Keir any good at all. He'd be far better to be trying to help solve the problems. Now, of course, in a pandemic, things change. We're learning more about the virus. We also see spikes in cases, for instance, as we saw in Bolton over the last few days, and that was going to come out of lockdown. It couldn't because of this spike in cases. Keir Starmer might call that a U-turn. I call that following the data and keeping people safe. And so I'm absolutely unapologetic about the fact that we'll look at all of the data, and if things change, like with quarantine arrangements as well, we will move swiftly and decisively. And people shouldn't play politics with that.
Look, I think a lot of people listening will agree with you. There's a difference between a U-turn over, say, algorithms for exams or the like, and changing policy on a lockdown or on quarantine. There was an issue with what happened with the local lockdown in the Greater Manchester area, though, where local authorities, local councils, local MPs, even the Greater Manchester Mayor, Andy Burnham, were saying, look, they were appealing to the government. No, don't lift the lockdown. We're seeing a rise in cases. And we had that sort of, aren't we in and out moment for about 12 hours in the local area. Lots of confusion for people. Again and again, the issue seems to be the failure to communicate clearly, give a clear message from the government. Is that something that the government's going to try and get on top of at some point?
Well, I think in the case that you just set out, that's totally unreasonable. And, Andy Burnham, frankly, should concentrate, like me, on helping to stop the problem and the cases in Greater Manchester. In the case of Bolton, which you mentioned, yes, the council, like me, thought that we could take them out of local lockdown. They had 17 cases per 100,000 people, which is below the rate at which we have people in lockdown. We took that decision and announced it. It was due to come into force yesterday. And then the number of cases, unfortunately, has shot up. It's now one of the highest places in the country. And as a result, I took the decision yesterday not to bring it out of local lockdown. Let's look at the substance of what's happening with the virus. Let's look at the data. Let's make sure we listen objectively to what the data is telling us and do everything we can to control the virus. So I was absolutely clear. I know that there were noises off, but I think people who are in positions of responsibility should be working together to solve this problem and to try to keep people safe.
Isn't one of the big issues, though, is that the test and trace system isn't working adequately enough yet, that
No,
we're able to...
that's wrong. That's wrong.
Let me finish the question, because we know that some people are, when they're going online, they're being sent to a testing centre that's 100 or more miles away instead of the local testing centre. Even with what's been happening in Bolton, we've just been speaking to the local MP saying they still don't know why this has spread. They've not been able to track down possibly someone who arrived from Spain, didn't quarantine, had the virus, went on a pub crawl, but they don't know. I mean, isn't the important point about the test and trace is that we are supposed to be able to not just identify quickly, but identify the root cause and therefore stop it from spreading? Yes. But clearly that hasn't happened in this case.
Well, you've just set out in the question some of the things that have been discovered from the contact tracing system, and we know far more about that outbreak than we have any previous outbreak because of the success of the contact tracing system. Not only finding people who are positive might infect, but also going back and trying to find where people caught it. And we know it's actually a really good example of where we know more than we ever have before because of the system. Now, we can always improve it, okay? At the moment, we find 84% of the contacts where the contact details are given. And obviously, I want that figure higher. It is well above many other comparator systems around the world. And I'm really pleased with the progress that we've been able to make on it. The testing, as you say, there's operational challenges in a massive system like this, but the vast majority of people can get their test close to them or at home and then get the result within 24 hours, get it the next day. And that's the system that we need. Of course, I'll constantly strive to make it work across the board, but I'm really glad that there's increasing recognition that our test and trace system is working effectively, and testing is widely available to anybody who has symptoms. There's a critical message to all of your listeners: if you have symptoms, get a test. And then we'll keep improving it.
Yeah, but of course, as you well know, the vast majority of people who do have coronavirus don't have any symptoms, particularly young people. Your predecessor, Jeremy Hunt, as Health Secretary now, Chair of the Health Select Committee, he suggested yesterday that we should have testing every week in secondary schools, particularly for teachers. Is that something you'd like to move towards?
Well, when we have a mass testing system available with the sorts of new technologies that we're supporting, with the extra money that we're putting in, we can look at those sorts of things. But at the moment, with the testing capacity that we have, the critical thing is to get into the areas where there's outbreaks and to ensure that everybody who has symptoms can get a test, because schools are safe. I'm really, really pleased that schools are going back right across the board.
You and me both. I'm a parent.
I know. I have 3 children, and for every parent, but most importantly, actually for the children. So that is going well. And I'm really pleased that the return of the schools has been so far so good.
Do you think there's a big problem though, trying to get the schools back, which does look like it's being largely a success, and getting people back to work in their workplaces, not a success so far? That a lot of this is very difficult to do when the government is warning, and you've done this quite a lot lately, talking about the risk of a second wave. There are many very eminent people in the virology field and in many other medical fields who really know a lot more about this, and I think both you and I would have in terms of our medical knowledge, who say, we are not in a second wave. There's no evidence of a second wave. We're seeing a rise in infections, but that's simply because we're testing a lot more people. Largely, it's young people. They're not having any symptoms. They're not getting ill. Virtually zero risk of dying. And we need to stop scaremongering about this.
So I love this question, Julia. I love this question because you've just asked me about our test and trace system, and you repeated the accusation that it isn't working. And then
I didn't say it isn't working.
Hold on. And then you explained that unlike France, Spain, many other parts of the world, America, Brazil, India, we are not seeing a second wave. And it's true, the number of infections here are broadly flat.
Yep.
The second wave is coming across Europe, and a combination of people doing social distancing, our quarantine policy, our test and trace policy, and our local lockdowns mean that we are not at this moment seeing a second wave here.
But it's not a second wave in Europe either. It is just a continuation. We're simply testing more people. There is no increase in hospitalizations or in deaths. A tiny little increase in Spain, which a lot of people think may be a statistical blip. Not in France, not in any of the other countries that have seen this increase in infection rates.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that argument, I wish were true, but sadly, it's not.
So so people like Carl Heneghan, who's a very eminent figure in this field at Oxford University, he's wrong.
Yeah.
He's wrong. Are you saying Carl Heneghan's wrong? Because he was the one who pointed out that Public Health England didn't know how to count how many people died of COVID. And he's been pretty right before.
I haven't seen his comments on this, but what I have seen is the data. And unfortunately, hospitalizations are rising in France and also in America. A couple of months ago, when their second wave started in a big way, we saw this rise in the first instance among young people, and there was this argument, well, don't worry, it's only young people. By the way, young people can get long COVID and debilitating long-term impacts, but are much less likely to die.
The vast majority of people who are young who get coronavirus have no symptoms whatsoever or very mild symptoms. Come on, you know that.
If you let me finish the answer. However, unfortunately, we've then seen in all the countries where this has happened, the virus then spread to older people, and because it naturally does, especially through families. Okay. So I'm afraid you've got to look at the experience of where people have seen a rise like this, and unfortunately it does then lead to older people dying. But there's a broader point, which is that in the UK, thus far, we have not seen a second peak, and that is in part due to the huge efforts people have gone to on social distancing, the success of NHS test and trace, and of local lockdowns. But we want to go further, and hence all this big step forward on testing that we're able to announce.
Just finally, I know you have to go and time's against us, but just finally, we're having people being quarantined coming from various countries. We may see a change in other countries, Greece, possibly more Portugal. People expect going back on the list. What's the point of us quarantining people who are travelling legally between countries when we've got 409 migrants arriving on boats across the Channel?
Well, we need to sort that as well. And we need to stop people coming. There's absolutely no reason to come over from France if you're illegally. There's no reason at all. France is a perfectly civilized country. And then if people do come here, we need to make sure that they're returned so that we stop these criminal gangs from trafficking people over the Channel.
Health Secretary Matt Hancock, really appreciate you joining us.